Hello everyone, and thanks for watching this video. Now, not every plan starts on the right foot, and this is definitely one of those. Well over a year before these images, I bought all the materials I needed to build an extension to the greenhouse that you see on the left, where to store all the tools, paints, and a bunch of other stuff. Except, as soon as I was ready to get started, my wife complained that I was going to bring also a lot of shade to the plants inside the greenhouse, and therefore my plan wasn't really ideal. And then I had to stop, and winter came, and winter was followed by one of the worst summers that Britain has seen in many, many years, bringing us to now, which is late August, when I can finally get started with my plan B. So please stick around and let's see what I come up with. So what's this plan B then? Well, me and my wife are very big fan of Studio Ghibli and particularly of the movie Totoro. And when we moved into this house, the first thing that we noticed was this massive tree that we have in the garden that immediately made us think of the tree that grows overnight next to the house where the main characters move at the beginning of the movie. And for this reason, it was a very natural choice to build a replica of the house from Totoro. Now, as you can see, the actual house is a real house, has 2 stories and is very, very tall, while I'm building a scaled-down version, and it's just going to be a tool shed. So I need to find a way to disguise the actual entrance and to make it look like a full house from the distance, even if it's a very scaled-down version of it. Now though, when you build something next to a big tree, you have one big problem, which is the roots. Any concrete base or pad base or surface base solution will not be appropriate because it will move a lot over time. And the best solution really is to use ground screws. This is not something I used before or I'm familiar with, but I watch a lot of YouTube videos and tutorials, and I also have an assistant, as you can see. And so, I mean, how difficult it can be, right? According to the manual, the first step is to drill very deep holes in the ground. This will facilitate the penetration of the screw and making the whole process a lot easier. That's what they say. That's not exactly my experience, but let's see how it goes. Step number 2, you grab the screws and then you grab the screwing tool. There are automatic, very expensive options, but I got the manual one. So you insert the tool on top of the screw and then you slide in the bar that will allow you to give it the torsion, and then, oh well, you look at that now. The power of grade school! Sorry, had to be done. Anyway, the truth is, this took a while, actually. I did it in more than one day, because I was exhausted. I would say the first half of the screw is fine, the second half is pure pain and desperation. Probably a 2-people job, if I have to give you a recommendation. I was on my own, and I did it just, and now it's finally time to go on the next stage. So as you drive the screws into the ground, you need to check that they are level with each other, and you do that by using a straight edge running across more than one pole at a time with a spiral level. Once all of that is done, this particular model has this bracket which actually give you a lot of tolerance and let you regulate the position of the base in all directions, which is very, very handy. Once you're happy with the position, all you have to do is screw the base to the brackets and then tighten the bolts of the brackets so that everything will stay in place forever. With the base sorted, it's time to build some walls, and that required a lot of trimming on the miter saw and a big pile of timber growing up on my bench. Apart from the base, the two side walls are the only thing that I had the luxury of building inside my workshop, and I was actually quite happy about it because the weather was nice and spending time in the garden was definitely a plus. But a lot of complicated math went into this stage. Essentially, the roof beams are meeting at 37 degrees, but they were too long to fit on my miter saw, and I didn't want to move the miter saw. And for this reason, I calculated the complementary angle, and that allowed me to cut them at 90 degrees. It looks a bit sketchy, but it actually worked just fine. So, success, and up to the next stage. Where there are beams, there are also joists. So after marking the position of the joist, I'm going to cut the slots, and I'm going to use the trenching function on the miter saw, which is quite brilliant and saves a lot of time. And it basically lets you cut a slot at a set depth. And I will cut a lot of slots next to each other, and then I will snap off the excess and clean up the carving. And here we go, you are now in the garden, we are surrounded by beautiful creatures in the peace and harmony of nature, right? I had this panel of double glazing line in the garden for over a year. A friend left it here asking if I had any use for it, and I said yes. And then eventually, here we are, that I found one. This is going on the back wall. The back wall is a bit of a license. It doesn't have anything to do with the design of the house from Totoro, but because I am facing fields, I thought it was going to be nice to have an observation deck, and this is what the back window is going to be. Up to this point, I hadn't quite clicked on how tall and steep this roof was going to be, and that's going to cause me a few issues later on, as you will see. But for the time being, I was absolutely shocked and amazed because the proportions are really, really unusual. The front wall is where things got really, really weird, and that's because my door is actually taller than the eaves of the house, and that meant that I couldn't run a beam horizontally at the top. And that's why this structure is so wobbly at the moment. And all I can do is brace it and screw it in place, and eventually it will only be stable once I apply the skin. At this point, the whole structure is a big jello. Everything is wobbly, and working on top of the ladder to fit the joist was going to be too difficult and dangerous. And that's why I decided to apply the external skin in OSB first, because that will make things much, much more steady and will allow me to work on the heights afterwards. Now, I was planning to trench the notches in the joist in the same way I did on the beams, but what's fun is that because of the way the trenching function works, I couldn't actually get a shallow channel on a deep beam, like in this case. And for this reason, I had to use the track saw instead. But it's the very same principle. You cut a lot of slices, then you snap them off and clean whatever's left in the cut. If you're hearing a lot of background noises, it's because my neighbors were building an extension, and I was actually overlooked by the builders during the whole process of building my little shed. And that's when it happened that I realized that I made a mistake in the design, and the last joist was too high and was going to affect the way I was going to build this particular design. So I had to cut a few more notches on the flight, and well, I survived. From this angle, you can definitely realize how steep this roof was and how tall it is. I had to invent a new tool which is called the wife clamp. This is a patent pending, but will be soon available in all hardware stores. On a project like this, really cladding takes a lot of time, and I also had a lot of parts that were individually shaped and had to be measured and cut one by one rather than going in stock, and then very precarily put them in place on my own because I'm too proud to ask for help. I wasn't totally sure about this. I mean, with a suspended base, in theory, you don't have infiltration from the ground, so you don't need a membrane. But I decided that it was cheap enough to have it anyway. And I mean, if it's not gonna do anything, it's still not gonna harm me. Cutting the hole for the window was quite satisfying, I have to confess. In theory, by structure, I had one window either side, but I decided to only open one because the other one, the one facing the greenhouse, doesn't really have a lot of use, and I rather have a full wall that I can use for storage. This is another thing I wasn't quite sure I had to use or not, but everyone is using it, so I decided to tag along. For those who don't know, this is like a very strong plasticized paper that is guaranteed to last for 15 years, is completely waterproof, and is used to protect the house before the final cladding goes on, but then it actually stays under the cladding and just adds to the general protection. From now on, the process is quite sculptural, really. I didn't design most of the elements that I'm going to build from now on. I just know what the final look needs to be. The actual house, the house in the movie, which is probably inspired by a real house, must have some sort of structure that makes necessary to obtain certain shapes and certain kind of claddings. But in my case, it's just going to be call it cake decorating, and I will add all the elements that allow me to obtain the very same look, even if they don't actually have a real structural function. Now, I was quite expecting this because of how wobbly the whole thing was, but by the time I finished with the cladding, the door was not quite square anymore. And for this reason, I decided to add an extra frame and square it up just by adding some spacers and regulating the screws until everything was square again. This means that the door will be slightly smaller than originally intended, but it's not really affecting the function, so I'm still happy with it, and well, better this than not having a square door, I suppose. And because the dimension of the door are changed, I need to redesign it, and I really couldn't be bothered to go back on the computer, so I decided to just draw it by hand, measure everything up, and have some fun just building. As I said before, the back of the house doesn't have anything to do with the original project, and I had these sheets of corrugated bitumen that were intended to be the roof of the original extension to the greenhouse, but they can also be used vertically to clad walls, and I think they work really, really well, and they have a lot of weathering on it because they've been sitting in the garden for over a year, and that really fits the project and fits the fact that this side is facing a big field where animals go roaming, so it's not too intrusive and it's not going to distract them too much. And it's now time to go ahead with the cladding. The underside of the roof, of the eaves of the roof, are shown with some sort of tongue and groove cladding, but I decided to just use a whole sheet of plywood and cut some grooves. So once painted, it will look like tongue and groove, but it's effectively only one sheet, and that means that it's very quick to put on and to fix in place with some broad nails. And the last bit is the front cladding of this roof boxy thing. Has a bit of a strange shape because of the way it's closing at the bottom. I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say about it. I don't really know why it has this shape exactly, structurally, if it was a real thing, but it works and it looks like in the movie, so I'm totally happy with it. Cladding the roof with felt was just another story. I only managed to make a few rows before I realized that my ladder was not really up to the task, and also that it wasn't going to be a one-person job. So I had to get another tall ladder with a few days before it arrived, and then I had to ask my wife to give me a hand. And unfortunately for her, she was on the side that also required to do all the legwork, going up and down, get the new sheets, while I was just stuck up there waiting for her to pass me something to do. And it's time to carry on with the cake decorating by creating the fake French door and the fake window on the first floor. As you can see, the door is actually a very different shape and a very different size from the one of the original house. So this is just going to be a pretend French door, and instead of glass I'm going to use a mirror, a plastic mirror. Same goes for the window on the first floor. It's going to be a frame and then a fake shutter. For the side window instead, this is going to be a real window. So I'm creating a frame with treated pine, and then I will make the actual window. The cladding with featherboards was quite an experience. It is something that I only done a couple of times and never really looked into it, but I soon learned that there is a science behind it and that I had it completely wrong. For once, you need to nail it in the middle of the board, not at the top. So I got the first row completely wrong, but also they were popping out very, very easily, and that's why halfway through you can see that I decided to switch to screws, because I always like the easy way. Once I sorted the technical issue, this stage went actually really, really smooth, and it was actually quite fun. I had to cut some corners, some feathering to allow the door to open without leaving too much of a gap. And then I had to work out the angles, so all these little bits unfortunately were all different one from the other. It took a little bit more time, but overall I quite enjoyed the process. I had the miter saw out this time, and that made things a lot easier. out of camera, I also prepared these blocks that are the supports of the under eave of the roof. I don't know the technical name, sorry. These will also be just screwed in place, so they don't actually solve any structural function, but they look the part, and that's all that matters. I designed the window in CAD and then I laser cut in acrylic the glass parts, while for the frame I decided to go old school and keep practicing in my sizzling and carving. It's far from perfect, but it's much better than what I've done in the past, which means that I did learn something, so I'm taking it, and yeah, it's gonna be fine in the end. Same story for the French window. It was just a lot of cutting of strips and then creating the notches to interlock them with each other. This took ages to do. I used pretty much every tool and every method that I could think of. Just painting them, as you can see, took ages. And this is the plastic mirror, which is actually quite nice to work with. It's very easy to cut and it doesn't ruin and it doesn't break. So I mean, it's probably the perfect material for this kind of projects. And the last thing to do is the shutter for the first floor window. I tried a few different methods, but I decided just to cut some chamfered bits and glue them together in panels and then glue the whole frame. So it's basically a very funky glue up of a board, and then it will be screwed in place, and that's pretty much it for it. There is one very last element to produce, and that's something that really makes the house recognizable. I call them the Totoro ears. I have this theory. I think it's just me because I haven't seen anyone saying the same. But this portion of the house, seen from the side, resembles the silhouette of Totoro, and these two spikes look like its ears. And therefore, I think that this is the real final touch that makes it a part of the movie. And I like to think that Miyazaki had this intention, even if probably he didn't. And that's it, guys. I mean, it took me probably 2.5 months. I'm so happy with it. It just looks in the right place. It's actually looking amazing. It's now almost winter, it's getting cold, and I have to wait for spring to put some plants around it and maybe some ground, because at the moment it's just loose dirt and it's gonna get very muddy very soon. As you can see on the inside, I have all my gardening tools. and that really goes well with the theme, because it was a country house and you do get that feeling when you get in. And this is the view from the back window. I'm very happy. I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you all on my next project.